Hello everyone. For today's video, we will be going over our last topic for the contracts unit of our course, and this will be the lecture video for class 8. So we'll be looking at contract liability on the part of CPAs. So we'll be specifically delving into performance, discharge, and breach, which are the scenarios that occur to terminate a contract that was legally formed. Then we'll look into instances in which genuine assent does not exist, and which a party to a contract, if they were to go to court, can then argue as a basis for a claim against them that a contract was not formed or a contract was breached. So as you recall, a contract is when two parties enter into an agreement, and on a legal basis, the law will assume that the terms of that agreement should be enforced, provided that the four elements of a contract are there. So again, to review, the four elements are mutual assent, consideration, capacity, and legality. We've since gone over each of these four elements in detail. And this last unit will put a nice ribbon onto all the things that we learned when it comes to contract law. So the first instance in which a contract is terminated is through what we call strict performance. So this is the cookie cutter scenario in which a party discharges all of his or her contractual obligations by performing according to the terms of the contract. So this is if two parties agree and everything goes according to plan, and there's nothing wrong, and then the contract ends. In this scenario, this would be strict performance. So substantial performance. So this is a circumstance in which not all of the terms of a contract may have been fulfilled, but the court won't necessarily say that the whole contract has to be void and then let's throw it all out and then everyone gets their money back and pays for reasonable compensation, right? This is a scenario in which the duties that were embedded in the original agreement are too difficult to perform without some deviation from perfection. So let's look at this example. So a contractor has just completed a mansion. Upon inspection, the homeowner finds that cheap water fixtures were used even though she explicitly required an expensive brand. Accordingly, she refuses to pay for or accept the home, attempting to void the contract. Because the breach is immaterial in relation to the total contract, the homeowner must pay for and accept the house. The contractor must pay damages for the repair or replacement of the fixtures. So in this scenario, you have a homeowner and a contractor that enter into a contract. The contractor agrees to build a mansion for the homeowner, and the homeowner probably agrees to pay the contractor. So the contractor ends up finishing the house, but he actually didn't perform strictly in the first scenario of strict performance. Instead, he chose a less expensive brand, even though the homeowner had requested an expensive brand, probably in the terms of the original contract. So she, at first, refuses to pay for anything or even take the home, saying, hey, you deviated from the terms of what I wanted. The house isn't 100% what I wanted. And she wants to just like cancel the whole thing. But in this scenario, the contractor already built a full house. It would be unfair for the law to come in and be like, yep, contractor, sorry. You expending all of that time and money, that's all gone. The house is just yours. You're not going to get paid though. You just built a house for yourself. That wouldn't happen. So even though what the contractor did is technically a breach, we call this immaterial in relation to the total contract. It actually doesn't take much away from the house itself. The house is 99% there. It just so happens that the water fixtures were not the right type that the homeowner expected. In this scenario, the homeowner has to take the house, has to pay for the house, but the contractor must pay the homeowner a little bit extra to repair or replace the fixtures themselves. So this is an example of substantial performance. So just keep in mind that if the contractor had intentionally used a brand that the homeowner wanted and intentionally used something that wasn't that, like just purposely used an inexpensive brand to save money, then the doctrine of substantial performance would not apply. It only applies if good faith is included within all the parties involved. So there cannot be an intentional committal of this immaterial breach. Even immaterial, it cannot be intentionally breached. So sometimes, while a contract was formed and the parties are adhering to the terms of the agreement, there may be a situation in which they don't want to continue with the contract. The cookie cutter scenario of a discharge by agreement, therefore, is something called mutual rescission. So this occurs when the parties to a contract agree to cancel it together. If that happens, then the contract operates as if it never existed in the first place, and then everyone shakes hands, walks away. That's it. With an accord and satisfaction, this is a scenario in which maybe a contract was formed and they're performing the contract, but then both of the parties realize, okay, given a new set of circumstances, let's both agree to just write a new contract and have the old one replace the new one. In that scenario, we call the new contract an accord, in which the prior contracts are discharged through what is called a satisfaction. So the new contract would usually have a term that says any prior contracts in relation to this deal are satisfied, blah, blah, blah. This would be an accord and a satisfaction. It's essentially a replacement of an original contract mid-contract, which also doesn't necessarily operate as the first contract never happening, like in the mutual rescission scenario, but instead it's just a new contract that says the first one concluded and is satisfied. So the first one still existed, it's just concluded rather than it never happened in the first place. So let's look at this example. A general contractor and a homeowner contract for the construction of a deck on the back of the house. The contract specifies that the deck is to be constructed of pine, and the homeowner will pay $5,000. As construction is near completion, the homeowner discovers that pine has not been used in the deck and addresses this issue with the contractor. Both parties agree that the price of the deck construction will be lowered to $4,000 given the contractor's mistake. After the construction is completed, the homeowner pays the contractor $4,000. Neither party can sue successfully because of the inferior wood nor decreased payment. The accord and satisfaction bars this legal action. So in this scenario, you have a general contractor who agrees to build a deck made out of pine wood for a homeowner. The homeowner agrees to pay the general contractor $5,000. They formed a legal contract. While the general contractor was building the pine or the deck, he realized he didn't use pine, and the homeowner discovered it. And instead of the homeowner just throwing his hands up and being like, "This is not exactly what I wanted. I'm gonna sue you and like just take your pine away, and I won't need to pay you any money." Instead, they both agree that instead, they'll do an accord, which is a new contract. So it would be a new contract in which the payment that the homeowner would give the contractor is instead $4,000, and the deck that the contractor gives the homeowner is instead not made of pine. So this is an example in which mid-contract a new one is formed that then satisfies the obligations of the original. And then this would bar either one from suing the other for enforcement of a contract or voiding a contract. So the third scenario in which a contract terminates is discharge by operation of law. So usually this scenario happens not through performance in which the terms are done and then the contract naturally concludes, nor is it by agreement in which the parties come together and agree to end the contract. Instead, this is when the law comes in and says, we're just going to end this contract prematurely, or we see that you want to end it for specific reasons and therefore will allow it. So there's four scenarios. The first one is illegality. So this is when the non-performance of a duty is excused after a contract is formed because it's objectively impossible to perform. Remember, if a contract is illegal, it's void on default. We looked at this before when we were looking at the four elements of a contract. So the illegality then simply happens when if a contract is formed and maybe the law said that before you could always do a wash sale rule, right, in a tax, and the contract was for a CPA, let's say, to do the taxes for somebody, but then the law changes and makes it so that you can't do the wash sale rule anymore. In that scenario, the contract would be discharged by illegality. Then there's impossibility, commercial impracticability, and frustration of purpose. So all three of these scenarios pertain to when a contract is formed and mid-contract, the circumstances surrounding assumptions of the contract that the parties had when they entered into the contract changes. And it goes by grade, where impossibility is the highest level and allows pure discharge of the obligations of a contract on the part of the parties, all the way down to frustration of purpose, which is simply a lower form. So let's look at them each. So impossibility is when circumstances may be changed so completely since the contract was formed that the parties could not reasonably have foreseen and expressly provided for the change. So this occurs if maybe two people enter into a contract and one of them dies or one of them goes into a coma. In this scenario, then the contract could be discharged through impossibility. Or it could be the scenario in which a party agrees to sell a piano to the other party, and then the piano on its way to the other party while it's in transit gets hit by a hurricane and is completely destroyed. In these scenarios, the parties could not have reasonably foreseen that, let's say, a person dies, a person becomes handicapped, a piano gets destroyed, right? In this instance, the law will come in and discharge the contract by impossibility. But because the circumstances have to be unforeseen, it's harder to prove. So therefore, we go into two scenarios. The second is commercial impracticability. This results from an unforeseen and unjust hardship. It's a less rigid doctrine than the impossibility exception. So this simply means it happens when an event occurs that the non-occurrence of the event was a basic assumption of the contract. So a good example of this is, let's say two parties come together and one of them wants to sell a racing horse, and the other one agrees to buy the racing horse. But then they make the contract, and then imagine that the horse, you find out, has a genetic disease, right? And the horse now can't race. This would be a commercial impracticability example, because the horse having a weird heart disease was an event in which the non-occurrence of that was a basic assumption. The party buying the horse wouldn't have bought the horse if he knew that this was a possibility. So he assumed that it would not happen. And lastly, we have frustration of purpose. This is when performance is still possible, but maybe the thing that one person is buying in the contract ends up losing value. So the purpose for which that person entered into is not available anymore because of an unforeseen event, and therefore the unforeseen event, because it was not foreseeable, the purpose is not available anymore. It's just a watered down version of the prior two scenarios that I mentioned. Another good example of this is, let's say I do a contract to hire a singer and for a concert, and then the concert is canceled due to a storm. This would be frustration of purpose. I hope you understand this. We'll move on to the next section.